The first sound I heard that morning wasn't the coffee pot humming or the birds on the fence. It was the sharp ping of a message slicing the dawn in two. Half awake, I flipped my phone over, expecting a grocery reminder or maybe Grace sending me another photo of her dog. Instead, there were 7 words, just 7. I need space. Staying another week. Richard. No greeting, no punctuation, not even a question mark. I read it twice. Each syllable felt like a soft slap across 33 years of marriage. But the strangest part? My hands didn't tremble. My breath didn't catch. I only felt an odd, detached clarity, almost relief. Maybe you think I'm heartless. Maybe you'd expect tears. But if you stay, you'll see why this wasn't the end. It was my beginning. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't scream. I just stood there, watching the coffee drip into the pot like a slow, sarcastic applause. Richard was in Cabo. He'd said it was a yoga retreat. Self-care. Refilling his cup. Apparently, tequila and Sophie were his idea of spiritual growth. But here's the truth. I wasn't shocked. Not really. In the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, a slim blue folder waited. I'd labeled it Title and Transfer years ago. Not because I expected betrayal, but because in inspection work you learn to document everything, even your heart. I pulled it out, laid it on the kitchen counter, and took my first real breath in months. No rage, no bargaining, just one thought repeating in my head. He needed space, so I'd give it to him, all of it. I called Liam, the realtor, before I even poured my coffee. His voice was bright, unaware. "Eleanor, how are you?" "I'm ready," I said simply. "To list the house, to leave it." There was a pause, then a respectful quiet. While Richard toasted clarity with Sophie, I started assembling boxes. His books, my cookbooks, the brass flamingo he'd bought in Sedona to apologize for missing our anniversary. Each item felt lighter in my hands than it ever had in my heart. I didn't feel heartbreak, I felt motion. And motion was something I hadn't allowed myself in years. If this already has you wondering what happens next, stay with me, because this was just the first step. Grace called me around 9 a.m., her voice already tinged with worry. "Mom, everything okay? I almost lied." Habit. But the truth felt cleaner. "Your father texted. He's extending his trip." Grace didn't ask with who. She knew. I could hear her exhale long and sad. "I'll come over." "No," I said. "I need to do this alone." Silence stretched between us, thick as old wallpaper. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Mom, you don't have to be so strong." But I did, because being strong was the only thing left that felt like mine. Richard used to be the man everyone admired. Patient, generous, the kind of husband who remembered to scrape the frost off my windshield each winter. But admiration is a funny thing. It blinds you to the slow drift. One forgotten birthday. One too many late nights at the office. 1,000 little betrayals that never left bruises but left scars. He was good at making me feel selfish when I asked for more. He'd tilt his head, sigh, and say, "You're never satisfied." Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I just wanted to matter, even if it took me 3 decades to admit it. I met Richard when I was 21, fresh out of college. He was older, already established, with a smile that made me feel like the luckiest girl in the room. By our 3rd date, I thought I'd found my forever. By our 3rd year, I'd stopped questioning why forever felt lonelier than I'd imagined. Marriage isn't one big lie. It's 1,000 little compromises you make until you forget you ever had needs of your own. People think betrayal comes as a thunderclap, but for me it came as a whisper, "You don't deserve better," until the day I decided that was a lie. Grace was our only child. She came into this world on a rainy March evening when Richard was stuck at an out-of-town meeting. I remember holding her, the weight of her tiny body against my chest, thinking, this is someone who will never make me feel invisible. Grace grew up watching me bend so Richard wouldn't break. She saw me swallow my voice so he could hear his own, and I thought I was teaching her strength, but maybe I was just teaching her silence. I promised myself that morning I would show her something different. As I packed, I found the wedding album. Tahoe, 1991. Richard in that navy suit, me in a borrowed veil because mine tore an hour before the ceremony. We looked happy in those photos, but I remembered what the pictures didn't show, how he'd ignored me the whole reception, too busy charming the investors at the next table. I'd spent the night trying to convince myself it didn't matter, that he loved me just in his own way. 33 years later, I finally understood his way was never going to be enough, and mine was the only way that counted now. I carried boxes to the garage, labeling each with a black marker. His, mine, neither. Somehow, neither became the heaviest pile. All the things we'd collected to prove we were a happy couple, the souvenir plates, the anniversary wine glasses, a brass flamingo with a missing wing, symbols of a story we told the world but never quite lived. I set them aside, not out of spite, but because I was finally done pretending. Done curating an image I didn't believe in. Done sacrificing my peace for his comfort. For the first time, the clutter felt honest. By the end of that first day, the house looked hollow. Not sad, just emptied of illusions. Grace texted me before bed. "Are you sure you're okay?" I took a photo of the garage stacks of boxes labels facing out like quiet confessions. I replied, "I'm more than okay." And I meant it. Because standing there in the echo of everything we'd built and broken, I realized something simple. I wasn't losing my home. I was reclaiming it one box at a time. And tomorrow, I'd start dismantling the rest. The next morning, I called Mr. Carter, my attorney. He drafted the trust a decade ago, back when Richard still called me his rock. Mr. Carter's voice was as calm as ever. "Eleanor, what can I do for you? I'd like to initiate Clause C." A pause. "Are you certain?" I looked around at the hollow living room. Completely. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. By noon, I had signed the first set of documents paperwork that would make our house mine alone, not out of revenge, out of self-respect. While Richard played at clarity, I was drafting my freedom. I'd always thought if we ever separated, I'd be shattered. But the truth was simpler. I felt efficient. Like grief had slipped on a uniform and reported for duty. I walked into the guest room, now my war room, and laid out 3 lists. Call Liam about listing the house. Arrange moving trucks. Close the joint accounts. I paused before adding the last item. Shred the photo albums. That one felt like a dare to myself. I didn't cross it off yet. Some good memories deserve to fade on their own. By Wednesday, the house was half boxed up. Every corner felt lighter, like I'd been living under a blanket of invisible obligations. I canceled the cable, forwarded the mail, and switched the utilities to my name. Richard didn't call, didn't text, didn't even notice the banking notifications stopped. Maybe he thought I'd wait, that I'd hover in limbo while he tasted freedom. He never understood I'd been waiting for years. I was done. And with every label I stuck to a box, I felt closer to something I hadn't known in decades, peace. On Thursday, I found the brass flamingo again, the one he'd bought in Sedona after forgetting our anniversary. He'd handed it to me like a peace offering. I know it's silly, he'd said, but I'd pretended it was enough. I set it on the curb with the donation pile. No ceremony, no regret, just a small, silent goodbye to the woman I'd been so eager to accept scraps of affection. Let someone else find meaning in that crooked bird. I was done pretending it mattered. The movers arrived Friday morning, 2 polite young men who didn't ask questions as I pointed out boxes labeled his and hers. They wrapped Richard's golf clubs, my grandmother's china, the framed diploma he never hung straight. It all looked so trivial in cardboard. I tipped the movers generously. Before they left, I stood alone in the garage, staring at the piles. Not sadness, not triumph, just clarity, like I was finally seeing my life without the fog of compromise. And it was so much simpler than I'd feared. Grace came by that evening. She stood in the foyer, scanning the empty shelves and stacked boxes. Her eyes filled but didn't spill over. "Mom." "I'm okay," I said before she could finish. She walked over and hugged me tight. Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. "I'm proud of you." For a moment, the old ache pressed against my ribs, the fear that I'd failed as a wife, as a mother, but Grace pulled back and looked at me with a steady calm. "You're showing me how to leave what doesn't love you back," and I knew she was right. That night, I slept in the guest room again, not out of spite, just necessity. Our marital bed had felt like a stage set for years. 2 bodies rehearsing a connection we'd lost long before Cabo. The twin mattress was narrow, but it was honest. No ghosts of forced affection, no pretense. Just me, a single pillow, and the quiet. Some people fear silence. I was learning to trust it. It held no accusations, no demands, just space. Real space for me to finally hear my own thoughts. Saturday morning, Richard posted a photo online. Him and Sophie poolside, her hand on his knee like a private joke. The caption, "Sometimes space brings clarity and better company." I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt confirmation. I screenshotted the photo. Not to confront him, there was nothing left to confront. I emailed Mr. Carter, proceed with Clause C full activation. Within minutes, he replied, "Understood. I'll handle the transfer paperwork." Just like that, the last illusion was gone, and I was free to finish my exit. By afternoon, I'd arranged 2 moving trucks, one headed to storage, one headed north. Liam called with an offer, a young couple from Orange County cash buyers. They wanted a quick close. 6 days, he said. Is that too soon? No, I replied. That's exactly right. Richard wanted clarity. I was giving it to him. In legal contracts, in updated locks, in a house he'd never set foot in again. Funny how fast a life unravels when you stop clinging to it. That evening, I stood in our bedroom for the first time all week. The dresser was gone, the nightstands empty. Only a circle of dust remained where his Himalayan salt lamp used to glow. I picked up our wedding photo, Lake Tahoe blue shawl, forced smiles. I flipped the frame over and slid the picture out. Not with anger, with precision. It didn't belong on my walls anymore. I placed it in the miscellaneous box. Closure doesn't always look like a confrontation. Sometimes it's just the quiet removal of things that never loved you back. Sunday dawned bright and cold, a perfect day for departure. I loaded the last boxes into the truck, kitchen utensils, spare towels, memories packed tight. When I stepped back inside, the house felt different. Not empty, just honest. No more pretending it was a home. It was just walls and floors. I left a note on the counter for the new owners. I hope this place treats you kinder than it treated me. Then I locked the door behind me. For the last time. Grace met me in the driveway. She looked at the moving truck, then back at me. "Where will you go, Montana?" "Why there?" I smiled. "Because if someone wants to find me, they'll have to hike 2 miles to get a signal." She laughed, but her eyes were wet. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I hugged her tight, not because I needed reassurance, but because I wanted her to feel what freedom looked like, and how quietly it could arrive. Richard called once. Voicemail, no apology, no explanation. Just a flat, tired voice. "Maybe we should talk when I'm back." I didn't reply. He wasn't coming back to the same house, or the same woman. I turned off my phone and placed it in a box marked unnecessary, because some conversations don't deserve a response, and some endings don't need punctuation. By Monday, escrow had closed. The house was no longer ours, not legally, not emotionally. Liam sent the confirmation email with a single sentence that felt like a blessing. "Congratulations, Eleanor. You're free." I stared at the screen, waiting for regret. None came. Just a soft, steady relief. I'd spent 33 years waiting for someone else to define my worth. Now I didn't need anyone's permission to feel whole. As I drove north, the road unspooled in front of me, miles of possibility. I didn't look back, not once. The past was behind me, folded into boxes I no longer owned. The woman I was had stayed in that house. The woman I was becoming needed nothing from Richard or Sophie or the ghost of who I tried to be. Just the quiet promise of mountains and a new beginning. I arrived at the cabin in Montana late Tuesday. Snow still clung to the pines, stubborn against the promise of spring. The realtor had left the key in a tin box nailed to the porch. No welcome basket, no note. Just a quiet that felt more honest than any apology Richard might ever offer. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Bare walls, a single chair by the window, and space, so much space. The kind he'd claimed to need but never granted me. Now it was mine, and it didn't feel lonely. It felt like relief. That night, I unpacked just one suitcase, clothes, toiletries, a single photo of Grace as a toddler. I left the rest in the corner unopened. Memories could wait. Healing couldn't. I sat by the window, a cup of chamomile steaming in my hands, and listened to the wind. No traffic. No ping of incoming messages. No footsteps pacing the floor behind me. For the first time in years, I felt safe in my own quiet. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, especially not Richard. Back in California, he must have returned to find everything gone. The locks changed, the house sold, his suitcases lined up on the porch like abandoned guests. I imagined the confusion. the bruised ego, maybe even a flicker of regret, but none of it mattered anymore. I'd spent decades trying to guess his moods, soften his disappointments, fill the voids he refused to name. Now I'd given him exactly what he asked for, space, all of it, and I wouldn't be there to watch him realize the cost. Grace called me the next morning. "He came by," she said softly. "To your place?" She nodded. "He looked lost, like he couldn't figure out where you went." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She took a breath. "I didn't tell him." "Good," I whispered. Some destinations don't need forwarding addresses. Some endings deserve to stay ended, and some freedoms only bloom in the soil of absolute silence. I thanked her and hung up. Then I stepped outside into the cold, letting it wash the last remnants of him from my skin. On my second evening in Montana, I lit a fire in the wood stove, watched the flames catch, curl, consume. I thought about all the ways I'd made myself smaller so he could feel big. All the times I'd swallowed my truth because he wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was just another way of staying tethered. Instead, I felt something cleaner, an emptiness I could fill on my own terms. I poured a glass of wine, lifted it to no one, and whispered, "To space." And I meant it. Richard finally tried calling again. Blocked. Then he showed up at Grace's door with a rehearsed speech, some blend of regret and justification. Grace stood in the doorway, arms folded. "She doesn't live here anymore," she said flatly. He tried to step past her. "She can't just disappear." Grace lifted her chin. "She didn't disappear, Dad. She left." He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because even he knew the truth, I hadn't vanished. I'd simply stopped waiting for him to notice I was gone. He drove to the old house out of habit, maybe hoping to find some trace of me. But the porch was different now. New plants, fresh paint, a child's bicycle leaning against the steps. He knocked anyway, like a man trying to wake up from a dream. A woman answered, smiling politely. "Can I help you?" I used to live here." Her smile didn't falter. Not anymore. She closed the door gently, leaving him on the stoop with nothing but memory. And the echo of all the times he'd told me I was too sensitive. He returned to his car and sat there, engine off, hands slack on the wheel. This was supposed to be temporary. A pause. A breather. He'd believed I'd be waiting loyal and patient like always, but he'd never understood patience is not the same as surrender, and absence is not forgiveness. I imagined him scrolling through old texts, hoping for breadcrumbs, but there were none. Only silence, deliberate, irreversible. I'd left no forwarding address, only a single envelope tucked into his luggage. Inside, 7 words in my handwriting. "You said you needed space." I listened. He opened that envelope in the rental car engine idling. My handwriting was neat, measured, the kind of clarity he never knew I possessed. No signature, no plea, just a sentence that made the air in his lungs stall. He read it once, then again. For a moment, I wondered if he'd finally understand that love isn't something you abandon and expect to retrieve unchanged. Maybe he'd realize that even devotion has a limit, a quiet final threshold, and he had crossed it without ever looking back. While he sat there trying to stitch together excuses, I was hundreds of miles away, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching snow fall through the cabin window. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something softer, like the first deep breath after holding it too long. The freedom wasn't loud, it was gentle, weightless. And in that moment, I knew I'd never again shrink myself to fit into someone else's story. This time, the story was mine alone, and it was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, I settled into the rhythm of the cabin. Morning tea by the window, long walks on the trail behind the property. Evenings spent reading books I'd never had time for. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting for my phone to light up with Richard's name. It never did. And eventually, the waiting stopped feeling like loss. It started feeling like freedom. There was no anger left to carry. Only space, real space for a life that finally belonged to me, and the quiet assurance that I'd made the right choice. Grace visited me that first month. She pulled into the driveway, her car dusted with mountain road gravel. When she stepped out, she looked around with wide eyes. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. I smiled. I thought so. Inside, she walked from room to room, touching the wooden walls, the small kitchen, the single bedroom. She paused by the window and turned to me. "You really did it." I nodded. I did. And in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not just hers, mine too. That evening, we sat by the fire wrapped in old quilts. Grace asked, "Do you think he regrets it?" I stared into the flames. Maybe, I said softly, but that's not my concern anymore. For so long, my worth had been tangled up in his approval, his attention, his excuses. But sitting there with my daughter beside me and 1,000 miles between us and the past, I realized something simple: I didn't need his regret to validate my healing. I only needed my own permission to move on, and I had finally given it. The next morning, Grace hugged me before she left. "Call me if you need anything," she said. "I will," but we both knew I wouldn't. Not because I was alone, but because for the first time I was complete on my own. After she drove away, I stood on the porch, watching the trees sway in the early light. It was quiet, uncomplicated, honest. The kind of quiet I'd spent my whole marriage longing for but never believing I deserved. And now it was mine, all of it. If you've ever found yourself waiting for someone else to choose you, if you've ever wondered whether your silence meant strength or surrender, hear this from me: your worth doesn't live in someone else's approval. It lives in the space you claim for yourself. I didn't think I could start over at 58, but here I am, proof that it's never too late to choose peace over pretense. If my story feels familiar, do one small thing. Comment "I deserve peace" below, because you do, and this time let that be enough.